The gavel hadn't even dropped, and the judgment had already been made. In a marble-walled courtroom of one of the most prestigious counties in the state, the air wasn't filled with justice. It was thick with assumption. The kind of assumption that doesn't need evidence. The kind that sizes you up before you even speak. He was just a kid. 17. Dark skin. Hoodie. No briefcase. No nameplate. Just a stack of papers in one hand, and a quiet fire in his eyes. He wasn't supposed to be there. At least, not on the right side of the courtroom. The bailiff almost didn't let him in. The clerk rolled her eyes when he asked for a copy of the docket. And the judge? The judge laughed. Not out loud, but in that smug way only people in power do. He leaned back in his chair, robes draped like armor, and narrowed his eyes. Son, this courtroom isn't for spectators. You're in the wrong place. The boy didn't flinch. Didn't stammer. Didn't move. He just looked up and said, calmly, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The courtroom chuckled. The kind of chuckle that bruises, not entertains. The kind that says, this'll be fun. And for the next few minutes, every word, every glance, every pause, it wasn't a trial. It was a test. One meant to humiliate, dismiss, and dismantle. They didn't know his name. Didn't ask. Didn't care. To them, he was just another mouth too bold for its station. Another teenager with delusions of grandeur and not enough respect for the system. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have imagined, was that this kid, the one they tried to laugh off the floor. I wasn't there to make a scene. He was there to make history. The tension in the courtroom could be cut with a knife. Judge Harold Whitmore, a man in his late 60s with a voice as rough as his reputation, eyed the defendant, Marcus Green, like he were already guilty. His long robe trailed behind him as he took his seat, the gavel slamming down with a weight meant to intimidate. In that same courtroom sat 17-year-old Elijah Carter, quiet, composed, and visibly younger than anyone else in the room. No one expected him to say a word. He wasn't there as a defendant. He wasn't even supposed to be involved in the case. At least, not in any official capacity. He was simply there to observe, part of a mentorship program for gifted high school students with an interest in law. Except Elijah wasn't just gifted. He was extraordinary. A prodigy with an IQ in the 160s, who had spent his summer studying legal precedents for fun. A teen who could quote the Constitution backwards, but who, in this courtroom, was invisible. To Judge Whitmore, Elijah was just another kid. But that perception would not last. As the trial proceeded, Marcus Green, a 28-year-old black man falsely accused of burglary, sat beside his court-appointed lawyer, who seemed more interested in checking his phone than defending his client. The so-called evidence was paper-thin, a grainy photo from a security camera, a witness statement that had already been retracted, and a timeline that didn't make sense. And yet, Judge Whitmore's tone made it clear, he'd made up his mind. This isn't a debate club, the judge sneered at the defense when the lawyer tried to raise concerns about admissibility. We're not here to nitpick technicalities. Elijah's hands clenched in his lap. He knew exactly what that meant, the judge wasn't interested in justice. He was interested in keeping his docket clean and his convictions high. In this courtroom, Marcus's innocence was less important than maintaining the illusion of order. Whispers broke out in the back row. It wasn't just Elijah who felt the injustice in the air. But he wasn't supposed to speak. He had no license, no standing. The rules of the court, and the hierarchy of society, said that he was just a child, and this was no place for children to interfere. Except that Elijah had spent years of his life breaking the barriers people placed in front of him. And today, his moment was coming. For a moment, silence filled the courtroom, a silence heavy not with respect, but with resignation. Judge Whitmore leaned back in his chair, adjusting his spectacles as if the weight of his authority gave him the right to ignore the truth playing out in front of him. "Let's move to sentencing," he declared, despite the mounting inconsistencies in the prosecution's case. Marcus Green's shoulders slumped. It was the posture of a man who had seen this play out too many times. A man who knew that innocence wasn't always enough when you're the wrong color, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. From the observer's bench, Elijah Carter felt a fire building inside him, not the kind that lashes out, but the kind that sharpens, steadies, and steels the soul for what it knows must be done. He stood up. Slowly. Calmly. Every pair of eyes turned. First, the bailiffs. Then the juries. Then Judge Whitmore narrowed with disbelief. "I'm sorry," Elijah said respectfully, voice firm but even. "But I believe the court is in error." A murmur ran through the gallery. It was as if a ghost had spoken, no one could quite believe what they were hearing. Whitmore stared at him, an expression caught somewhere between amusement and contempt. "And who exactly do you think you are, boy?" the judge asked, the word boy laced with venom, dripping with centuries of entitlement and erasure. Elijah didn't flinch. "I'm someone who's read every word of the People v. Anderson ruling you just misquoted," he said, holding up a battered copy of a law journal. "And I believe the exclusionary rule applies in this case. That security footage was obtained without a warrant, in clear violation of Mr. Green's Fourth Amendment rights." Gasps echoed from the back. The court clerk froze. The prosecutor dropped her pen. Judge Whitmore's lips parted slightly, not in surprise, but in a dawning realization that control was slipping from his hands. "I'm warning you," the judge began, but Elijah stepped forward, gently placing the open law journal on the defense table. "No disrespect, Your Honor," he said, "but justice doesn't check your age before it speaks. The Constitution doesn't ask how old you are. It just asks if you're brave enough to stand up for it." Even the court reporter had stopped typing. And it was in that instant, quiet, bold, and unshakably clear, that something shifted in the room. Not because Elijah had shouted. But because he hadn't. Because his courage was quiet, his knowledge undeniable, and his motive pure. He didn't want applause. He didn't want fame. He just wanted the truth to matter. And that made it impossible to ignore. The silence didn't last long. But it was enough. Enough to remind the room that something extraordinary was unfolding, not with shouts or spectacle, but with precision, conviction, and a kind of brilliance that didn't ask for permission. Judge Whitmore shifted in his seat, visibly unsettled. His gavel remained untouched, he knew better than to invite more attention. But the discomfort in his posture betrayed what his words refused to admit. He had just been corrected. In public. By a teenager. "Bailiff," he muttered, "escort this spectator out of the courtroom." But before the bailiff could take a step, a new voice spoke up. This time, it was Mr. Davis, the defense attorney who had been stumbling through motions all morning, his face now pale and eyes wide with realization. "Your Honor," he said, standing slowly, I request a recess." The judge blinked. "On what grounds?" Davis hesitated. Then turned to Elijah. "Because this young man just cited case law more accurately than I've seen from most seasoned associates in my firm. And I'd like to know who he is." The judge scoffed. "He's a child playing dress-up in a courtroom." Elijah took a step forward. And for the first time, he placed something on the defense table that changed everything, a leather-bound folder, worn, frayed at the edges, but cared for. Inside were certificates, mock trial accolades, national debate victories, and a letter of recommendation with a Department of Justice seal. At the top, Elijah Marcus Carter, intern, Federal Legal Scholars Program. The room tilted. People leaned forward. And even Judge Whitmore's jaw tightened as he read the credentials through narrowed eyes. "You've been shadowing federal attorneys?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Elijah replied respectfully. "For over a year. I'm also in the top 0.1% of LSAT scorers nationally, and my early admittance into Columbia Law was approved last fall. Someone in the gallery whispered audibly, "He's still in high school." Another added, "He's not just a kid. He's a prodigy." Elijah didn't smile. He wasn't here for applause. Instead, he turned to Marcus Green, who was still shackled, shoulders now trembling, not with fear, but with a mix of hope and disbelief. "I read your case last night," Elijah said softly. "Every line. Every file I could access. And what I found," he paused, glancing at the jury, "is that this man is innocent. And the evidence being used against him has been unlawfully obtained." The judge tried to interrupt, but Elijah anticipated it. "And if the court refuses to acknowledge that," he continued, voice steady but firm, "then I will take this to the Court of Appeals. Because this isn't about your courtroom, Your Honor. This is about the law. And the law is not yours to distort." Gasps again. But this time, the crowd wasn't just watching. They believed. Because in a place where injustice had been normal for far too long, a 17-year-old, armed with truth and restraint, had just reminded everyone what courage looked like. Elijah didn't yell. He didn't posture. He just stood there. Unmovable. Unmistakable. Unforgettable. And for the first time in years, Judge Whitmore was the one on the defensive. Because a young man in a pressed blazer, standing beside a falsely accused stranger, had just reminded him that real power comes not from the bench, but from the truth that refuses to bow to it. Truth is a stubborn guest. And when it enters a room uninvited, especially a room built to protect egos, not justice, it rarely goes unchallenged. Judge Whitmore's lips tightened into a thin, bloodless line. He didn't speak at first. He didn't have to. The flicker in his eyes, part insult, part panic, said enough. In front of the jury. In front of a room now leaning in, breath held, captivated. He had been called out. Not by an attorney. Not by a seasoned politician. But by a teenager in sneakers who had read more case law than most first-year associates. And in that moment, Whitmore made the oldest mistake of men in power. He confused a challenge with a threat. He mistook truth for rebellion. "Young man," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "you are not licensed to practice law. You are not a member of the bar. And unless I'm mistaken, you're not even legally an adult. Your interference today is contempt of court." The room chilled. Contempt. It was a serious charge. One that could silence Elijah. One that could have him arrested. Handcuffed in the very same room he had just tried to protect. But Elijah didn't flinch. He raised his eyes, not defiantly, but calmly. The same way a lighthouse stands against crashing waves. "I understand that, Your Honor," he replied. "And I accept the consequences. But if speaking out to prevent a wrongful conviction is contempt of court, then I'd rather face your punishment than live in quiet agreement with injustice." The word struck like a quiet thunderclap. Not loud. But impossible to ignore. A murmur moved through the gallery. Even the court stenographer paused, fingers hovering above the keys, stunned into stillness. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "You want to teach me the law," he spat. "You, a high schooler, want to tell me how to run my courtroom?" "I don't need to teach you anything," Elijah said gently. "I'm just reminding you of what you already swore to uphold." For a second, something flickered across the judge's face. Not fear. Not shame. But recognition. Because deep down, even behind his pride, behind the years of unchecked power, he knew Elijah was right. Still, power doesn't yield easily. And in that moment, Whitmore did what so many have done before him when truth cornered them. He lashed out. "Remove him," he barked to the bailiff. "Right now." The officer hesitated, glancing not at the judge, but at Elijah, and then at the crowd. He saw phones raised, eyes wide, people recording not just a courtroom moment, but a cultural one. "Elijah," Marcus Green called out suddenly, his voice hoarse, "don't do this for me. Don't get yourself in trouble for someone like me." But Elijah turned. And what he said next pierced the silence like a blade. "Sir, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for all of us. Because if they can silence me for telling the truth today, what's stopping them from silencing everyone tomorrow?" The room froze. Even Whitmore looked shaken. Because in one sentence, Elijah had done what no one expected. He didn't just stand up to injustice. He made it personal for everyone watching. This wasn't just about a teenager or a case. This was about what kind of world we were willing to allow. What kind of silence we were willing to live with. And who would pay the price for it? The bailiff lowered his hand. The courtroom remained still. Judge Whitmore, once so eager to bark commands, now sat in uneasy quiet. Not silenced by force, but by the overwhelming weight of collective eyes, of unspoken judgment, of history quietly recording every word. Because when power is faced with courage, even the mighty must pause. And on that day, in that courtroom, courage had a name. Elijah Marcus Carter. There are moments in history that don't come with trumpets. They come with silence. A silence so profound that it demands your attention. A pause where the world seems to wait for someone to do the right thing. And in that silence, something shifted. Because truth, once spoken, doesn't retreat. Elijah stood still, the courtroom tense with anticipation. Judge Whitmore, seated behind his heavy mahogany bench, suddenly looked smaller. Not because he had moved, but because something greater had entered the room. Accountability. It began quietly. A rustle in the back row. Then footsteps. Firm. Unhurried. Purposeful. The courtroom doors opened once more. And through them stepped a woman whose presence carried the kind of weight only earned through years of unseen battles. Assistant Attorney General Teresa Dalton. Sharp. Respected. Feared, even. She wasn't there for spectacle. She wasn't even scheduled to appear that day. But she had seen the footage. She had read the rushed court order, the questionable charges, the name of the judge who had long been whispered about in private circles. And she had heard about a teenage boy who stood alone in court, and made the whole room listen. Teresa walked to the front like she belonged there. Her heels echoed like punctuation. Each step a sentence in a larger story. She turned not to Elijah, but to Judge Whitmore. "Your Honor," she began, her voice even, calm, but laced with something undeniable, authority, earned and unshakable. "I'm invoking supervisory jurisdiction under the Department of Justice's Emergency Oversight Statute. This proceeding is no longer in your hands." The silence cracked open. Gasps rippled through the room. Whitmore's eyes darted, searching for an ally. A procedural shield. But there was none. Not today. "This court is under review pending immediate investigation," Teresa continued, as she handed a document to the stunned bailiff. "Any further action from this bench may constitute obstruction." And just like that, power changed hands. Not with anger. Not with shouting. But with the quiet, deliberate voice of someone who had finally decided to act. Elijah looked at her, stunned. She turned to him briefly and offered a nod, not of pity, but of respect. "You did what you could. Now let me do what I must." Meanwhile, Marcus Green, whose life hung in the balance just minutes ago, broke into tears. Not out of fear anymore, but out of relief. A freedom he hadn't dared to imagine was now inching into the light. Journalists were already outside. News vans parked at the curb. Phones vibrated with alerts. Teen exposes judge's misconduct in courtroom showdown. DOJ intervenes after viral court video sparks uproar. In the chaos of the modern world, some stories still had the power to stop people in their tracks. Because it wasn't just about a case now. It was about a question. What if the people we ignore are the ones who will save us? Later that day, as Elijah sat quietly on a bench outside the courthouse, trying to make sense of it all, Teresa joined him. "You did good," she said. "No small talk. No condescension. Just truth." He shook his head. "I wasn't even supposed to be in that courtroom." "Exactly," she replied. "That's why you were the only one brave enough to say what needed to be said." She handed him a small card, nothing flashy. Just a number. A contact. An open door. "If you ever want to make this more than a one-time thing, give me a call." Elijah didn't speak. He just stared at the card. Not because he was unsure, but because, for the first time, someone powerful believed in him. And that belief. That's when the real change begins. Sometimes, justice doesn't arrive with a bang. It arrives with paperwork. With quiet apologies. With sudden retirements and quietly amended records. And yet, make no mistake, justice had arrived. Just 2 weeks later, the courtroom that once hummed with smug silence was unrecognizable. Gone were the whispered judgments. Gone were the eyes that scanned Elijah as if he didn't belong. Gone was Judge Whitmore. The official statement cited health concerns. But everyone knew the truth, the mask had cracked, and what lay beneath could no longer be hidden from public view. What remained? Accountability, and a promise that what happened that day would not be buried. The Department of Justice had launched an internal review of Whitmore's rulings. Dozens of past convictions were now being re-examined. One by one, young men, many of them black, received phone calls they never expected. "Your case is being reopened. You were right to speak up. We're sorry. It didn't fix everything. But it changed the temperature of the room." The air in the courtroom felt lighter now. Less oppressive. Like someone had opened a window no one realized had been nailed shut. And Elijah? He returned, not because he had to, but because he wanted to see it for himself. He walked through those tall oak doors, not as a defendant, not even as a mystery. But as a witness. A symbol. People turned when he entered. But this time, the glances weren't sharp-edged or skeptical. They were reverent. Because Elijah had done what few dared. He had looked injustice in the eye, and didn't blink. As he sat quietly in the back row, a new judge entered, Justice Mariana Cruz. A Latina woman known for her fairness, her precision, and her refusal to be influenced by politics or pressure. She saw Elijah. She didn't blink either. She offered a small, respectful nod. He nodded back. In the front row sat Marcus Green, no longer in a jumpsuit, no longer shackled. His charges had been dropped. And his life? It was his again. He spotted Elijah and smiled, not the smile of a man who was rescued, but one who had seen courage up close. Later that day, Elijah received a letter. Hand-delivered. Cream paper. Gold seal. It was from the National Law Scholars Program. The very one he had once been told wasn't for kids like him. They were offering him a full scholarship, tuition, housing, mentorship. But it wasn't just the opportunity that struck him. It was the first line of the letter. Mr. Elijah Carter. We watched you redefine what it means to practice law before you ever stepped into a courtroom as a licensed attorney. That night, Elijah sat in his bedroom window, the same one he used to stare out of, wondering if the world had a place for him. Now he knew, it didn't just have a place. He had carved one with truth, with integrity, with fire. He didn't need a robe to make him righteous. Didn't need a title to make him powerful. Didn't need permission to speak. And in a system that once told him to wait his turn, Elijah had simply chosen to stand. They say the courtroom is where justice lives. But Elijah Carter taught us something different. Sometimes, justice walks in unannounced. Wears sneakers, not robes. Speaks softly, but carries a mind sharper than any gavel. What happened in that courtroom wasn't just a clash between a judge and a teenager. It was the echo of a much older story, a system built to favor some and silence others. Elijah didn't just expose a corrupt judge. He exposed a truth we too often ignore. That credentials don't equal character. That titles can hide weakness. That wisdom isn't always the loudest voice in the room, it's the one willing to wait, watch, and strike with truth. And perhaps most importantly, that greatness doesn't need to be announced. It just needs to show up. In a world quick to dismiss those who speak quietly, those who look different, those who don't come from power, Elijah reminded us that brilliance has no uniform. He was the student they ignored. The voice they tried to drown out. The truth they underestimated. And yet, it was his presence, not their prejudice, that endured. It was his grace, not their arrogance, that left the mark. As this story closes, we are left not just with admiration, but with a challenge. How many Elijahs have we overlooked? How many young minds have we silenced with doubt? How many courtrooms, classrooms, boardrooms still carry echoes of bias disguised as tradition? Elijah's story didn't just inspire change. It demanded it. And in doing so, he reminded us of something sacred. That justice isn't just a verdict. It's a posture. It's who you choose to be, especially when no one is clapping. Especially when you're doubted, dismissed, or disrespected. So, to the Elijahs watching this now. To those who have been mocked for dreaming big. To every young soul told to know your place. Don't shrink. Don't dim your light because someone else is afraid of how brightly you might shine. Stand up. Speak wisely. Walk boldly. Because one day, the very system that tried to silence you will have no choice but to listen. And maybe, just maybe, that's how real change begins. If Elijah's story moved you, share it. Let the world know that respect is not owed to titles, it's earned by truth. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that restore faith, reveal truth, and remind us all. The quietest voices often carry the greatest strength. Thank you for watching. Until next time. Stay strong. Stay awake. And never stop believing in what's right.